He was just a kid on his way home from practice, but what Danny Dietro found in that dimly lit garage would change two lives forever. It wasn't a stray dog. It was a desperate plea for help in the freezing dark. Danny Dietro, all elbows and knees at 10 years old, wasn't usually one for noticing details. He was more about the thrill of the game, the wind whipping through his hair during lacrosse practice. But he had a soft heart, especially for anything small and vulnerable. He'd once spent an hour rescuing a stranded earthworm from the sidewalk after a downpour. This evening, though, was different. The air wasn't just cold. It was the kind of bone-chilling, teeth-chattering cold that seeped into your clothes and made your lungs ache with every breath. The setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows from the bare, ice-covered trees, making the world seem stark and unforgiving. As they drove past the condo complex near their home, Danny's dad, a practical man who believed in logic over hunches, ruffled his son's hair. "Almost home, champ. Hot chocolate's waiting." But Danny's attention was elsewhere. In the far corner of the complex's garage, dimly lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb that buzzed annoyingly, something dark lay huddled on the ground. The garage was a concrete cavern, almost as cold as outside, heavy with the smell of exhaust and damp concrete. It was a shapeless mass, nearly blending in with the shadows. Danny's first thought was a discarded bag of trash, but something about the way it shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, made him pause. He squinted, his breath clouding in the frigid air. Was it a dog? A large cat? He felt a prickle of unease, a feeling he couldn't quite explain, a knot tightening in his stomach. "Dad, I think there's something over there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, his hand instinctively reaching for his dad's arm. His dad slowed the car slightly, peering into the darkness, but ultimately dismissed it. "It's probably nothing, Danny. Just some junk or a shadow. No one would leave a dog out in this weather." He tried to sound reassuring, but even Danny could hear a sliver of uncertainty in his tone. But that sliver was enough. The warmth of the car couldn't thaw the icy knot of worry that had formed in Danny's stomach. He kept replaying the image in his mind, the shapeless form, the slight movement, the unsettling stillness. He tried to focus on the thought of hot chocolate, of his warm bed, but the image kept intruding. He fidgeted. He asked more questions, his imagination running wild with increasingly dire scenarios. But what if it was hurt, Dad? What if it's freezing? Once home, the contrast was stark. Their house was cozy and inviting, filled with the aroma of dinner cooking. But the warmth didn't reach Danny's core. He couldn't shake the feeling. He approached his mother, Dawn, who was unloading groceries. "Mom, I saw something in the garage. I think it was an animal, and it looked hurt." Dawn sighed, pulling off her gloves. She'd had a long day, and the thought of going back out into the bone-chilling cold was the last thing she wanted. "Danny, I'm sure it's nothing. Probably just some old blankets or something." But Danny's eyes were wide and pleading, his lower lip trembling slightly. He wasn't just whining. He was genuinely distressed. He used specific details, his voice cracking with emotion. "Mom, it looked small. It didn't move much. What if it's freezing to death? We have to check." Dawn looked at her son, really looked at him. It wasn't just childish persistence. It was something deeper, a genuine fear in his eyes, a desperate plea that resonated with her own maternal instincts. She saw a reflection of her own compassion in his worried face. She couldn't ignore it. Bundling up again, Dawn felt a growing sense of dread with each step back towards the garage. The wind seemed to mock her, whipping her hair across her face and stealing her breath. The cold was even more intense now, biting at any exposed skin. The sounds of the garage, the creaking of metal, the wind whistling through cracks, amplified her apprehension. Danny might be right, she thought, her heart starting to beat faster. As she got closer, her flashlight beam illuminated the figure. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a cat. It wasn't trash. It was a person, an elderly woman, curled up on the cold concrete floor, her face pale and her lips tinged with blue. Dawn gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, she was frozen in shock, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Then, a wave of adrenaline surged through her. She had to act fast. The woman, Kathleen St, on 80 years old, was shivering violently, her thin, bare hands trembling uncontrollably. Her eyes were open, but they were glazed over with a mixture of pain, confusion, and a terrifying resignation. She was barely conscious, mumbling incoherently. Dawn's fingers fumbled with her phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. "Help! There's a woman. She's on the ground, in the garage, at the condo complex on Elm Street. She's freezing. She's barely conscious." Her voice was strained, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She struggled to remain calm, to provide clear and concise information to the dispatcher. While on the phone, Dawn knelt beside Kathleen, gently touching her arm. "Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me?" She checked for a pulse, finding it weak and thready. She knew basic first aid, enough to know that moving her could be dangerous, but leaving her on the cold concrete was even worse. Meanwhile, Danny, fueled by a mixture of fear and determination, sprinted back to the condo, his legs pumping furiously. He pounded on the first door he saw, his small fists making little impact against the solid wood. "Help! There's a lady in the garage. She's hurt. We need blankets." A startled neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a retired firefighter, opened the door, his eyes widening in alarm. He quickly grasped the situation and grabbed a stack of blankets from his closet. Together, Danny and Mr. Henderson rushed back to the garage. They carefully wrapped Kathleen in the blankets, trying to provide some warmth without jostling her too much. Danny, his voice trembling, knelt beside her, holding her cold hand. "It's okay, ma'am," he whispered, his own tears freezing on his cheeks. "You're going to be okay. Help is coming. Just hold on." He repeated these words like a mantra, a desperate plea to both Kathleen and to fate itself. The wait felt like an eternity. The sounds of the cold, the wind howling outside, Kathleen's labored breathing, the rhythmic thump of Dawn's heart, all amplified the agonizing suspense. Dawn and Danny huddled together, sharing their body heat and their fear, offering each other silent comfort. Finally, the flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance cut through the darkness, a beacon of hope in the bleak landscape. The paramedics arrived, their movements swift and efficient. The scene at the hospital was a blur of activity, worried faces, hushed whispers, the beeping of machines. Kathleen's family, alerted by the police, rushed to her side, their faces etched with concern. The doctor, his face grim, explained to the family that Mrs. St was suffering from severe hypothermia and dehydration. "She's very lucky," he said, his voice low. "Another hour, maybe even less, and, well, she wouldn't have made it." The boy's quick thinking saved her life. Kathleen's family was overwhelmed with gratitude, their eyes welling up with tears. They looked at Danny, this small, unassuming boy, with a mixture of awe and profound thankfulness. Days later, Kathleen, weak but recovering, was able to speak. Her memories of the ordeal were hazy, the terrifying fall, the biting cold seeping into her bones, the growing despair, and then the faint sound of a child's voice, the warmth of blankets, a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. When Kathleen, wrapped in a warm hospital blanket, finally saw Danny and Dawn again, her eyes filled with tears. "You saved my life, young man," she said, her voice trembling, reaching out a frail hand to touch Danny's cheek. "You and your mother, you're my angels." Danny, usually shy, blushed and looked down at his feet. I saw something, and I knew we had to check," he mumbled. Dawn put her arm around her son, her heart swelling with pride. "He has a good heart," she said, smiling at Kathleen. Kathleen gave Danny a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a cherished keepsake. "This is a robin," she explained. "They always come back in the spring, a sign of hope and new beginnings." "You brought me hope, Danny." The Dietros and the St became unlikely, yet inseparable, friends. They shared dinners, celebrated holidays together, and Danny often visited Kathleen, reading to her or simply sitting with her, a silent bond forged in the crucible of that frigid night. Danny grew older, but he never forgot that night. The memory of the cold, the fear, the desperate race against time, and the overwhelming relief of seeing Kathleen safe, it all remained vivid in his mind. He learned the importance of listening to his instincts, of helping others, no matter how small he might feel, of the fragility of life, and the profound impact one person could have on another. It was a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness, driven by a gut feeling, could have the power to change a life, to weave an unexpected and enduring thread of connection between strangers. And the little wooden robin, perched on his bookshelf, served as a constant reminder of the night he became a hero, simply by refusing to look away.